Hello and welcome to the first episode of the second season of the Green Sofa Dialogues. Joining me today are a trio of energy leaders. We have today Rana Adib, the Executive Director of REN21, Ingrid Nestle, a member of the German Parliament for Die Bündnis 90, the Grünen, the Green Party, and Emma Pinchbeck, the Chief Executive Officer of Energy UK. Panelists, welcome to all three of you, and thank you so much for joining me for what is sure to be a very exciting conversation. Why don't we just go ahead and get started? Let's think about, and I want to ask each of you panelists, and Rana, maybe I can direct the question to you first. What do we need to achieve at COP26?
At COP26, I think we clearly need to achieve that there is an understanding that we are not reaching the climate targets if we don't seriously engage in the transition out of fossil fuel into an efficient renewable energy-based transition. And this clearly means acknowledging the fact that energy is everywhere, that driving the energy transition will not happen if we do only look into the energy supply side, but we also need to include all sectors in the discussion and make sure that they have basically targets, but also roadmaps and policies and regulatory frameworks to make the shift happen.
Thank you. And Ingrid, I'll ask you the same question. What do we need to achieve at COP26?
Well, yes, I absolutely agree. We also have to see that what makes it possible to set and actually reach a lot more ambitious goals, but we also have to really get more ambitious goals. I think this is a key factor, to get sufficient ambition into this and to get it fixed among the different parties. And of course, it's one of the big issues in every country. I'm sure that people say, well, but what does it help, if we take strict measures, but the world doesn't? And we say, but we do have an agreement. We have the Paris Agreement, and it has a very good general level of ambition. Yeah, it's the 2 degrees, and we want the 1.5 degrees, and that's okay. And that's a global agreement. But now we have to really make it work. And I think this is a key point, because only with a global agreement, people will really see that they can actually get what we need, and that is climate protection and a world that we leave to our children that's worth living in. And so this is really, really a key issue. And then, of course, we will only get this going if we also have, if we have enough renewable energies, if there is a different way of mobility, different technologies of mobility. And I think we could actually gain a lot by cooperating on these issues, but also making clear, that this is not a fun issue, but that those who actually join into climate protection have advantages, because all this cooperation is actually very future showing cooperation, and that's it's only it's not even 30 years until 2050. It's such a short period of time when you look at what we have to achieve, but also when you look at like in industrial processes and developments. I mean, 30 years is not a huge time scale when you look at industry. And so things will move there very, very fast if we have a future. And if we don't, we won't have industry either. So it must be clear that people profit. And of course, I'm trying not to make it too long, but of course, money is also an important issue. Money to help poorer countries, both for climate mitigation and adaptation, for loss and damages. And I'd also be happy if there was an agreement that for climate education, because it's such a huge issue. And yes, we have all the technology to live very well without destroying our climate, but it means huge changes in all parts of life, in industry, but also personal life. And we all have to know why we're doing it, what we really have to do, and what are the big points and what, are the small points that really don't make such a big difference in order to reach it. And I think really it's crazy that not all students are actually learning the facts about climate change and climate mitigation, what we have to do and what we can do and how we can do it. But it still seems like an issue that children have to teach themselves, at least in lots of schools worldwide. So I think there's an important issue too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Emma, what do we need to achieve at COP26?
What everyone else said, but in short, I think there's been a lot of focus on long-term targets, and as Rana and Ingrif have both said, actually we need to get on and deliver now. And I would like to see, and in COP language, that means that the nationally determined contributions that we saw at Paris need to be significantly tightened, because in the run-up to Paris, they were developed in line with 2 degrees. We've now got an ambition for 1.5 degrees. The NDCs at Paris were not enough to deliver 2 degrees, and they still aren't enough to deliver 2 degrees. So we need to see considerable tightening of national commitments to get us there. And I suppose that means tightened international roadmaps from everyone who's attending the COP, and a good global stocktake. And then when we come back home, governments actually turning that into action. We desperately need policy for the next 10 years. It's the next 10 years that will make or break this. So it's a decade of doing. I also agree with the point about finance, particularly around green infrastructure. And as we all know at COPs, international equity is really important. So the sense that developed countries are going to support developing countries to access green technology and to cover things like loss and damage and adaptation. And I suppose within that, these are not energy sector points, but I would be really interested to see what this COP comes out with in terms of land use and agriculture, because I think actually on the mitigation side of things, on the clean technology side of things, we actually know what we're doing. But on land use and agriculture, those are now huge issues in terms of emissions that we do not have the same level of plan for. And then lastly, it's a UK COP. It's in Glasgow. It's a home COP. I'd like the UK not to mess it up. That would be quite nice. We have a great diplomatic service in the UK, and just as in Paris, it would be good to see us really leverage that skill to get good agreements happening. But of course, there's some great things happening in the UK. Our power sector emissions are down 70%. We've shown that you can decarbonise and still grow economically. So for me, completely selfishly, living in the UK, I'd like us to show other countries that are perhaps sceptical about renewables or sceptical about decarbonisation that it's possible.
Thank you. You talked about some great things that have been happening in the power sector. Is the power sector or the energy sector ready to lead by example? And is this something that can go from the UK and sort of spread across the globe?
Yes, I think so. My career history, I used to work for an NGO, and I'm a climate change specialist by background, and I was headhunted by the energy industry to be their spokesperson and to help the sector with decarbonisation. And that tells you how serious the UK energy industry is about this, or they would not hire me. And they're definitely up for a challenge. And then I think generally what we've shown in the UK is, firstly, there's lots of variable renewables now in our system. Around a third of our electricity mix is now wind and solar. And we've done that maintaining security of supply. And the other thing that we've achieved in the UK is coal phase out. So we'll be coal free by 2025. And that's been a fairly rapid transition too. And we're a developed economy with an industrial base. And I think all of those things demonstrate that stuff we didn't think was possible is possible in electricity. And now our national grid is talking about a system with 75-80% plus renewables on it and other low carbon technologies. We've got an EV target for 2030 now, sort of phase out of ICE vehicles by 2030 in the UK. We're pushing on with heat decarbonisation in this parliament. So there's this big shift happening. I think that's really exciting. The thing that I think the UK can now help with is firstly helping other countries build out large-scale renewables and doing that piece I talked about, either through diplomacy or through financing, helping export these technologies to other parts of the world. But the second thing is we're going to be one of the first energy systems that has to integrate low carbon heat, low carbon transport, and a lot of variable renewables on our grid. getting that right over the next 10 years will be something that we can hopefully then share with the rest of the world. And just to finish on this, that's what we did with our contract for difference auction, which is how we financed our renewables. That model is now being copied elsewhere in the world. So we know that if we can get it right in the countries that have gone early, it's replicable elsewhere. So I suppose that's my job for the next 10 years or so. But it is a really exciting time in energy. And coming back around, the reason I work in the private sector now and not an NGO is generally the private sector is moving faster than government. And secondly, I'd like to win the moral argument on climate change, but I don't have to for progress, because the economics of the energy transition are now so good that industry wants clean technology, whether or not they're doing it for emissions reduction.
Yeah, actually, I'd love to copy a similar form of the contracts for difference scheme that you've lined out for Germany, and I think this is absolutely key to get an energy transition that really gets other people to say, wow, I want this too. And yeah, you have some great points there in the UK, and the shift out of coal. I think you've managed to do it cheaper than we do in Germany, which of course makes it more attractive to follow. And actually, it's absolutely possible to do it in a cheaper way than we are doing at the moment. And I think that's one point that we have to keep in mind when we do all our domestic processes. I mean, there are lots of people who say, well, climate protection is so important. It doesn't matter what it costs, you know, it's so important. Make it expensive. Who cares? Yeah, as long as it's there. But it won't work. We have to be careful to make it really, really good and really, really efficient, and not always the nice, nobody will say, oh, it hurts mechanism, but we need to make it in a way that other countries say, wow, this is a good way to go. And as you've shown with the renewables, we've really reached a great point there, because new electricity from new renewables is cheaper than electricity from new coal or new nuclear or new gas or whatever, you know. So we've really gotten the point, but of course we have to keep it, you know, cheap, but also ecologically in a good way, and to make others join in. And unfortunately, sometimes I can see that we're not even the leaders anymore in Germany, but there are other countries who are going a lot faster, and that's really sad.
Rana, I saw you there, and I've seen you this whole time nodding and smiling. I know that you just came out a few days ago with a new report, that REN21 just came out with a new report. I'd love to hear your thoughts now.
And I'm very sorry, I'm going to bring a bit of a critical into this perspective. I think it's really important to and I'm underlying what Emma and Ingrid said, renewable energy can deliver, and it can often deliver at least cost. And that is something which means today we don't need to prove anymore the maturity, the technology is there, it's about deployment. Now, the reality is, I think finance is even there, but the reality is the bankability of projects depends very heavily on the policy regulator frameworks. And in many countries, we're actually not on track. So this is one point I think to underline, but I would like to broaden this again, because the areas where we see lots of renewable energy developments is in the power sector. And we consume more than 80% of our energy for heating, cooling, and transport. And in heating and cooling, we have a share of 10% approximately of renewable energy, in transport of 3.4%. And the big elephant in the room, I guess, is these sectors highly depend on fossil fuel. And even though investment are going into renewable energy and into the renewable energy power sector, in those sectors, unfortunately, over 110 countries are still subsidizing fossil fuel. 500, I think the last numbers are $550 billion going into fossil fuel subsidies. In 2020, the investment in renewable power and fuel was of $303 billion. This clearly shows a huge disconnect. And I think that's really a point which needs to be heard at COP, that we are not going to make it happen if we only support renewable energy and efficiency. We clearly need to ban fossil fuel. And I think that's where the example of the UK is extremely interesting, because the diesel ban, for instance, on the internal combustion engines is clearly leading to the fact that fleets and operators and the automobile industry is going down this way. They don't have the possibility to do differently. And I think this is also another aspect which needs to be understood, that it's about incentivizing, obviously, renewable energy, because we need the societal support, we need the market support, it's a transition that concerns everybody. That is very clear. But there is also the possibility of obligations. And I take the heating sector, so in the building sector, 2/3 of new buildings worldwide is being constructed in countries where there is no energy-related regulation. And that's in 2020 a no-go, considering the fact that we are basically, we have 10 years to make it happen. And the report we just launched on the status of renewable energy showed that, for instance, in the G20 countries, or 2020 has been really a new standard, a new norm in terms of net zero ambition. And I think that is really something we can step back on this. Many governments joining in, cities joining in, corporations joining in, and I think that's fabulous. When we're looking, however, how this is translated into renewable energy targets, from the G20 countries, for instance, only 5 countries have a renewable energy target in 2020. Only 3 of them have been reaching them. When we're looking globally, we see that targets and policies for heating and cooling, renewables in heating and cooling, and in transport have been stagnating since 2017. So there's unfortunately a real disconnect between the ambition and what we see number-wise, I guess, like on the ground. And 2020 with the COVID economic recovery packages could really have been a key, a game changer, I guess. Also because the energy demand has gone down significantly in 2020, so 4% or so. But the reality is that in the economic recovery packages, fossil fuel receives 6 times more support than renewables. And I think these are actually things where our role at Renewable One has started to shift, but it's also in pointing out and looking at what is not happening basically on the fossil fuel side, because this has a major impact on what can happen on the sustainable energy side. And though I would love to be very optimistic, and there's always this tension, do you tell the nice story or the not so nice story? I think it is, we need to tell both stories. There are major opportunities, and actually if we don't build on those opportunities, where it's about missing opportunities, and not only missing opportunities in terms of climate, but missing opportunities in terms of economic benefits, in terms of jobs, in terms of air quality, and when we're speaking about the developing countries, in terms of really building up energy infrastructure that can drive social and economic development. So I think it's...
I think just, you know, this is not an organizational point, this is a personal one, but I think that you mentioned heat and building. So for what it's worth, in the power sector, I genuinely think the market will get that change done. So we don't have a renewables target in the UK. We don't even have an emissions reduction target for our power sector, actually, but we did have a coal phase out target. The government, I think, is looking at gas, but to be honest, the sheer economics alone will get a lot of power done. And the International Energy Agency came out, who have always been very conservative, and they came out 2 weeks ago and said there's no need for further fossil fuel extraction, which was like a bomb going off in the energy industry. But they're right, because the shift is now so profound. I worry about heat and buildings, and I worry about transport, and that's partly because of the lack of regulation, but it's also to do with consumption, and that we know that emissions are rising globally partly because of lifestyle change and increased consumption. And the nature of capitalism is not to necessarily reduce consumption. And so when you think about energy efficiency outside of the power sector, when you think about reducing demand, so moving people onto things like public transport, reducing the need for oil and gas for heating, that all feels like it will have to be regulated, as well as just the market incentives working. And I think that is hugely challenging for governments, particularly because it's so personal for their citizens. It's going to mean telling people what to do in their homes and telling people how to get around. And there's an element of it as well that feels like it could become one of those things where it feels like developed nations telling developing nations they can't access a similar lifestyle, and therefore having to make bigger cuts in developed economies. All of that feels like a huge political challenge. And so that's where I share your nervousness, Rana. I mean, I'm a walking optimist, you have to be in this job, but I see that it's not just economics, it's also about regulation.
Well, the optimism is about the opportunities rather than what has happened at the moment.
Yes,
I mean, if you look at these emission curves, every COP we look at how it's been going up and up and up over the past and how steep it has to go down. And every year the go down that we need is steeper because we didn't go down as we should have in the year that has passed. So absolutely, until now, we're really not on the right path. The point is we would have a good chance to live very, very well on a right path. The technology is there and the finance is there. But the regulation is not there. In many places, the regulation is going a different way. I'm not even so much worried about, the power sector getting too much attention. I think in the end, a lot is power sector. I mean, cooling is power sector in the end. And heating is an issue, is an important issue, absolutely. But I mean, even in Germany, and we're a rather cold country, it's 20% of the emissions, it's not like everything, even less than 20%. So we still have to deal with it. Absolutely. It's an important issue. But there are many countries in the world that are too warm to have a big warming issue. So at the global scale, I think a lot will run down to electricity. And then, of course, whether we manage to use electricity in mobility sector or not. But we need this electricity. And at the moment, I sometimes see that we're starting to switch over to electricity in other sectors, especially some people are dreaming of using green electricity for mountains of hydrogen that will just solve everything. But this green electricity is not there. We have a massive problem with the lack of green electricity. And all these solutions that we have for the other sectors and the heating and cooling and mobility, they will not work unless we have a lot more green electricity. Especially all these thoughts about gas can just stay there. It will be hydrogen or even methane. We will take CO2 out of the air, and make mountains of methane. We don't have the green electricity for such an amount. And actually, it's too expensive to getting all the CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's a kind of, I think it's just I don't want to change a thing. But if we change the way that we need to, electricity will be a crucial part.
I think just to build on the changing I also feel that unfortunately the energy discussion is still happening very much from the energy supply side. So we're looking at all the capacity there, instead of really making sure that there is a deep understanding of the fact that the energy consumers really also in their change and decarbonization strategies also integrate the energy component on the supply side and the fact that they need to move to renewable energy with regard to this. And I think the power, basically the corporate energy producers clearly show the way with regard to this. I think RE100 has doubled their membership over the last year. We see that on the corporate power purchase agreement, the capacities, the growth has been of 18% compared to 10% globally. So I think there is an understanding. The reality is, however, that those players are very often not sitting around the table. We are speaking about a systems change where discussions and strategies and the regulations are still handled very much in a siloed approach. And I think this, even in the COP, when you see how the energy discussions are handled, the connectors are not really there. And I think this is, for me, one of the big challenges we need to address to make the system change happen. I just take an example. The International Transport Forum is happening next week. There are two interventions, one on hydrogen, not even renewable-based hydrogen, the other one on electrification. Renewable energy is not mentioned once in the whole program. And I think this is now an event, but we see exactly the same when we're looking into the NDCs, on the transport NDCs, and how little the fuel is basically integrated. And I think this is something where we need to work together to make these bridges happen. And this often means bridging ecosystems, but also understanding that we think about energy in a very different way. Yeah. The reality is, on many energy consuming sites, energy is actually not their political priority, I guess. And climate might not be the political priority. And I feel that sometimes as energy players, we need to be a bit more humble and saying, like, let's understand what is driving them, and then bring in how renewable energy can serve those decision makers in reaching their goals. And I think in the corporate side, one of the key arguments is economics. Maybe the environmental and sustainable governance and criteria and the finance rating, etc., is also a driver. Reputation is certainly also a driver, but ultimately it's about economics. So it's also, and I guess, sorry, I'm mumbling now, but I guess it is also about for us to develop different skill sets. It's about how do we communicate, to whom do we communicate, who do we target as decision makers, what are the stories, how do we use the evidence to inform, and how do we then also create the regulator frameworks that work with it. And I feel we still tend to end up in a very expert-driven discussion, jargonized, and forgetting that ultimately we have energy consumers, whether it's citizens, whether it's corporations, cities, whatever, that have their own agenda and priorities, and they need to deliver toward this.
I think that's going to be critical as well, as we could. By the way, Jennifer, I'm sorry if we could clearly do this all day.
You could. I love this. This is fabulous. Go on. We're going to cut my explosion out, but please, Emma, go do it.
There's a couple of really interesting things within that. I think 2 or 3 on. So on the kind of pull through and how important that is, I think you're right, and certainly in the UK now, as we're looking to electrify heat and transport, there's a lot of concern about how you make consumers, whether that's individuals or things like fleet owners, charge their vehicles at particular times so as to manage the load on the grid and to kind of integrate properly with large-scale renewables. And actually where we are at with the deployment of renewables now is that the things that will stand in the way of that market growing are non-market based. They're things like, do we have the physical space? Do we have the grid connections? Can we manage load shifting across seasons? Do we have storage enough? Do we have a vibrant demand side with consumers properly engaged? And then there's a lot of discussion about how we finance renewables when they're at scale. Is it through more corporate PPAs, or is it a continued CFD now that renewables are so cheap? And what does that world look like? So it's a very different market where the pull through and the other end of the system is now as important as just the siloed approach to the power sector. And then I think you're right about other actors and other motives. So we have a bad habit of the energy industry thinking in silos. And I think one of the really big challenges for the sector is understanding on something like hydrogen, Ingrid, like you mentioned, the challenge for hydrogen is not could you use it? It's, is it the right thing to do when you look at entire global decarbonisation pathways? And then you quite rapidly run out of space for the number of turbines you need, or you realise that you can't make enough hydrogen to do both electrification of heat and transport. So again, you have to see right across the silos to make a decision about whether it's a good idea or where you should use it. And for us in the UK, we think hydrogen is going to be really critical, but probably not for anything that you can electrify first. So if you can electrify heat, you do that. If you can electrify transport, you do that. And you use hydrogen for the bits that you can't do, and that's the appropriate use for it. But that sort of thinking is very alien to a sector or to the economy when you think bottom up, and where we're used to thinking about separate vectors of energy. So it's a huge challenge. And lastly, Rana, the thing that we could maybe unpack other actors and motives. So, local governments, big corporates, individual consumers, all of these entities are motivated not just by decarbonisation. I mean, I'm pretty into climate change, but I honestly make decisions most days based on ease of things with a toddler. And so, my life choices are not just about the greenest thing to do. They're about things that are convenient for me or cheap for me or other things. And I don't think we've done a good job of explaining benefits of decarbonisation to people. I think Ingrif was making the same point earlier. We need a much better set of communications around this. And, just to finish, something I've been thinking about a lot in the UK at the moment is that we've got a lot of gas boilers. 85% of our heating in the UK is done through gas boilers and a gas network. And I work on decarbonisation. On a good day, I'm an expert in energy technologies. I genuinely did not know until recently that my boiler is a source of indoor air pollution. And I've got a little girl with asthma. And that is a huge motivator in what I might do with my heating system. I'm lucky enough to be able to afford something that's green. But even so, just the idea that I've got something that is polluting in my house is just, as a mum, just like, and I've been having conversations about heat decarbonisation for a decade, and indoor air quality has never come up, and that could be a huge motivator. So I mean, that's a personal example, but we need to think through the lifestyle benefits of a green economy and sell that to people. It's not just about the emissions reduction. That was a ramble as well. We're all going to
From my last trip to the UK, I had the impression that you could also do a lot on efficiency in the housing sector. And they say that after being so positive about your coal fade out.
Yeah, we're great on power. Terrible with buildings. Our buildings are shocking. Yeah, again, maybe that's a contribution we can make, because if we manage to electrify our heat and sort our buildings out, and we can do that cheaply and efficiently over 10 years, our buildings are so bad that actually that will be something that we can share with others, because it's a huge challenge. You
have really good potential there to get more efficient. From that point of view.
It's a real low line to work up from.
But I guess the question of the day is what the COP26 can sort out, what it can and has to sort out about it, and when it will explode, because there are too many issues on the table. And well, I still think that the level of ambition, is really crucial. And then countries can, to a certain point, themselves find out what is a good way to do it. And I'm happy to see that even us coming from different countries have very similar views on it. So I think that maybe things will converge in a way. That maybe there should also be an agreement. I mean, we need a lot of money for mitigation and adaptation, loss and damages. Maybe there should be a certain agreement to not put out 100 billion plus money, and on the other hand, pay a lot of money to subsidize fossil fuels and do the opposite. It's horribly inefficient and stupid. And maybe the COP26 could put a clear signal there as well, to not give money the other way around, and kind of agree on that, in order to go into one direction together as the COP26 countries, and not do one thing and the opposite at the same time and spend a lot of money on that.
It would be really nice to think that could happen, but I'm skeptical that you're right. I think that again, when the IEA is recommending no more exploration, that tells you there's a kind of reckoning coming, I think, on fossil fuel extraction, certainly. And I think that's, again, helped by the economics shifting and the sense that stranded assets might be a really big issue. That said, there is still, some of my work was international in my last job. And when you talk to finance ministries and energy ministries globally, quite often what you get is a desire to do renewables, but a lack of capital, whereas fairly often fossil fuel infrastructure is being financed there by wealthier nations through aid budgets and through development programs, and development ministries will often therefore want to build fossil fuel assets because of the need for energy access and growth. And you're right, there's a responsibility there for the nations that are financing those to break that cycle, but I think it's a very politically challenging thing to do at a COP, when nations that export fossil fuels will want to continue to do that and live in the kind of world where they think that they can continue to do that, and nations that are worried about energy access still need to feel that they have access to energy infrastructure if they're not going to get the money for renewables. I that's my point of skepticism. You're right, I'd love to see both sides done, money for green stuff and something challenging the taxation systems and the way we finance fossil fuels internationally, but I think that latter one is really tough. That said,
maybe at least the international level of financing fossils, if there's like a domestic subsidy, it's bad enough, but if you subsidize like the export of coal-fired power plants, this is absolutely the craze, and it really affects the possibility of other countries to reach their climate targets, because if this power plant is there, or if some extractive industry is there, that's where this country is heading.
Yeah, and maybe we could put pressure on the UK has actually now made a commitment on export credit financing for coal, because for the exact reason we have a domestic coal phase out, and people pointed to the hypocrisy of that, and I'm thrilled that we got to that point. Part of the reason was that we're COP hosts and we're a member of the High Ambition Coalition and also the coal phase out group. So I wonder whether a similar pressure could be applied to the other members of the coal phase out group. And I'm sure that thought has occurred to the UK government. So it would be interesting to see if that's something that they look at. I wonder about carbon pricing, what your views are on carbon pricing, because that I think could be on the table for COP. The UK government is, the UK has a kind of green finance hub, so they're interested in anything finance related, and we have our own carbon market now, having left the European ETS, so we'd like our carbon market linked with the ETS. There's an explicit commitment to look at market linkage on carbon pricing from the UK government, and there was some discussion about CBAMs as well, carbon border adjustments to stop industrial leakage. That could be something that might help fossil fuel financing be reduced. What do you think?
I think in general, putting a price on fossil fuel pollution, I think is something which needs to happen, because this is also going to change the economics directly, actually, and underlining the benefits. I participated yesterday in an event of RISE, the readiness from the World Bank, basically, where they are assessing the readiness of countries for efficiency and renewable energy investment. And unfortunately, the carbon pricing has not been moving at all. So I think this is, again, we are also, and there are so many, there is a lot of pushback, I think, of some of the market players and the industries at the national level on putting a price here. And there are obviously countries like Sweden that show that it's possible to do it. I think there is really good discussions happening at the European level also. But the reality is that globally, there is a pushback. And I think this is, for me, where I would hope that COP is going to really start this decade on what does transitioning mean, because I think we really, we can not only look at the driver's side, but we really need to look at the dragger's side and get those voices also into the discussion and being heard. And because they have concerns, and as long as we don't listen to those concerns, there will be the pushback. And I think this means, when we're looking at the subsidies, for instance, that we need to develop more and more subsidy swaps or switch strategies here. Because it's not possible to go to developing countries where basically a subsidy on energy is not only a subsidy on fossil fuel, it is also a real subsidy of the energy price, which has a high societal and political signification in many of those countries. And that's probably where also the socioeconomic and political conditions of each country are a bit different. But where I clearly feel is, especially on this disconnect between the discussions we're having in the industrialized countries and developing countries, there needs to be much more of a space for acknowledging that the shift here is a different one, and that the priorities are a different one, and that we clearly, as or in industrialized countries, there is a major opportunity to not only decide, okay, we're cutting basically support for fossil fuel infrastructure, and I think this needs obviously to happen, but accompany those countries to still meet their goals of having energy access, of really having the energy for economic development, etc. And the other part is also, as long as the oil and gas and coal sector are extremely influential. That's just the reality. I mean, and we clearly see, for market reasons, and I think the court judgments and shareholder judgments on Shell, Chevron, Exxon the last couple of weeks show also how we can mobilize other influences in making the shift happen on the oil and gas side. We see oil and gas companies deciding to get out of oil and gas or reinvent themselves because they need to do so to have access to the finance markets. When we're looking, however, on what they're really doing in terms of investment in renewable energy, that's something we did in the report too, it's nothing actually. And I guess it's about also identifying the right players who can influence the decision makers and how we can link the strategies.
Rana, thank you very much. I have to be honest, I sort of would love to do this for the rest of the afternoon, but I know that we all have, unfortunately, events on our calendars, and we need to wrap things up in a few minutes. You know, the title of our discussion today is Entering a Critical Decade of Climate Action. And maybe in a minute or so, each of you could sum up your final wishes for COP26. And as we enter this critical decade, what are your wishes? Emma Pinchbeck, I'd love to start with you.
Oh man, I mean, as we said at the beginning, I love a good target. I'm thrilled to see so many countries setting net zero targets and recognizing 1.5 degrees of ambition. I think, you know, as Ingrif said, this 2020 was a watershed for governments really getting on board with the low carbon transition and a sense that the political consensus was just now there on decarbonisation, and I love that, don't get me wrong, but I would trade all of that for action over the next 5 to 10 years, like real concrete policies from national governments to make change happen, particularly on the tricky stuff that isn't the power sector. And then I think lastly, there's an intergenerational thing that we've seen over the last 5 years. One of the things I've been really proud of in the UK, or love being part of, is the kind of new activism, particularly from young people. And you know, Rana mentioned shareholder action, and there's this groundswell from the public now that they want more from their politicians, and that felt like a really positive thing. I would love to see the people in my job, people in the energy sector, start realizing that what that demographic wants is much more radical action, much more quickly. And given that they're going to inherit anything we do over the next 10 years, that we sort of need to act on their account rather than our current customer base too. So that's what I'd love to see, as a kind of shift in mindset at the COP.
Thank you. I'll turn next for wishes to Ingrid Nestle. What are your, in about a minute, what are your wishes for COP26?
Well, I can support everything that Emma said right now. I'd love if just everybody understood that we are dealing with physics and facts, you know, and that sea level rise will not negotiate with us later on, or melting glaciers, or lack of food because there's no rain, or the wild storm, you know, that this is just facts we are dealing with, and that we're dealing with in one way or the other, but they are there. If just everybody understood this and kept it in mind, I'd already be quite happy.
Thank you. And Rana, Adib, your wishes for COP?
My wishes for COP is to make sure that the ambitions and the targets are implemented and in the national laws, because otherwise, unfortunately, there is the risk that we are not working in the right direction, so that they are binding. But the other part, very clearly, that there is a deep acknowledgement for the fact that fossil fuel contributes to 2/3 of the CO2 emissions globally, and that making the shift happen means ending the fossil fuel era and moving into the efficient and renewable-based energy era, and that this is only possible if basically all energy producers and energy consumers put the renewable energy share kind as a key performance indicator into their agenda. And here it's not about the target, but it's about a performance, about an acknowledgement that we need to move forward every single day, that it's short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets. And action.
Moving forward every single day is important, and thank you very much thank you actually to all three of you for your participation today. For this first of the second season of the Green Sofa Dialogues, with me today were Rana Adib, Ingrid Nestle, and Emma Pinchbeck. Thank you all very much, and thank you to our audience at home watching.